The Scottish Green Party are holding their annual conference in Dunfermline this weekend. Judging by the reports in some of this morning's papers, it's been a pretty jolly, upbeat affair. A party of government these days. The delegates have been applauding the positive change they've been able to make over the past couple of years. It's a warm, sunny picture they're painting, but is there just a trace of a cloud on that horizon? Some of the Scottish Government's more progressive policies have already been ditched, and there is a feeling that more could follow. So, with a couple of years in government under their belts, what might the future hold for the Scottish Greens? Let's find out, shall we? I'm pleased to say the party's co-leader and Minister for Green Skills, Lorna Slater, joins me now live from the conference in Dunfermline. Morning to you.
Morning.
The First Minister, I'm going to come to your party and your policies and your conference in just a second, but I must ask you as a government minister about the subject we've just been discussing. The First Minister promised just a few weeks ago that any material whatsoever, including WhatsApp messages, his words, would be handed over in full. And now we learn lawyers fear that most of the WhatsApp messages they want to see have been deleted. How do you think that looks?
Of course, I mean, I have absolute sympathy for families who are bereaved during COVID. So many of us lost loved ones and friends during that time. And the work of the inquiry is so important to go forward so that everybody can understand the decisions that were made, the circumstances under which they were made, and can get that closure that people are talking about. As has been said by other ministers, the Scottish Government is absolutely committed to supporting the inquiry and being absolutely transparent throughout.
Do you use WhatsApp in the course of your work?
I do not use WhatsApp for government business, no. Not
at all? No discussion of any government business, nothing? Purely personal WhatsApp, nothing work-wise?
Correct. No government business, absolutely.
Right. Party business?
Indeed. So, personal business, sometimes party work, volunteering work that I do, chatting with my friends, sharing silly memes, all that stuff. But government business is only done on government devices. Right,
and you joined government 21st of August, I think, 2021, 2 or 3 days before the public inquiry was announced, so right in the teeth of COVID. As far as you were aware, you didn't see any WhatsApp correspondence at all that related to COVID or the situation or the fight against the pandemic?
Not at all. All government correspondence goes through official channels. We have very secure government devices where all of that work is done, and therefore it can be monitored and can be shared out under FOI and other transparency procedures as needed. All right.
As a matter of interest, do you use a default delete function on WhatsApp? I mean, you seem to use the app. Do you default delete your messages?
I do use WhatsApp for personal reasons. I can't remember. Some of the chats may have deletes on them, and I have to go through the phone.
Right, but it's not government. You haven't been advised by anybody within the Scottish Government that WhatsApp should be default deleted. That's not government. Is it government policy, as far as you know?
I mean, I don't have a government phone, so my phone is for my personal use, and there has been no advice on that because it isn't used for government business.
I'm surprised that you're a government minister. Why don't you have a government phone?
For exactly this reason, so that all the work that I do is on that government device and can clearly be seen what government work is done, so that personal and government business is totally separate and there can be no confusion between the two.
Sorry, you do have a government phone?
I do not have a government phone.
Oh, right, okay, so you only use your personal phone. Okay, listen, let's move on, shall we? Let's move on to your party, your policies. It's your conference this week. I've been looking at the agenda for your conference. 9 motions, 6 of them laid out in advance, 3 emergency motions. Council tax freeze issue, Palestine-Israel solidarity with Ukraine, a Gaelic university, autonomy for Shetland, human rights for trans prisoners, a list of 9 of them. Absolutely nothing there that relates to the environment. I mean, the environment's something of a priority for your party, isn't it? Why is it not being discussed?
Oh, it is absolutely being discussed, Martin. We were able to make some significant announcements yesterday. Being in government means that we can not only talk about our policies, but actually get them implemented too. Yesterday, I was able to announce the government target of between 4 and 6 gigawatts of solar power for Scotland. We're looking at free ferry travel for young people in our islands under 22s to travel by ferry for free. We're looking at being able to tax cruise ships, apply a levy to cruise ships visiting, so that councils that host cruise ships can raise that revenue and in terms of managing that very polluting industry, as well as bringing revenue into our rural and island communities. These are all really important announcements, and all of them are absolutely right on tackling the climate crisis.
I want to ask you about what the first emergency motion that I mentioned there, the council tax freeze. What do you make of that policy that was announced very suddenly and unexpectedly at the SNP conference a couple of weeks ago by the First Minister?
We've had a lot of discussion about that policy. Indeed, here at conference and our Scottish Greens conference, there's been a lot of enthusiastic discussion around that. Heated debate, as it should be. Party democracy is so important that we can debate these things. I think we've gotten to a really good place on that, both in terms of how we negotiate the budget this year to make sure that frontline services are adequately funded in the next budget, but we need to keep our eye on the prize, which is that fully reformed council tax, which I know that is something that the Scottish Greens feel really strongly about, and the First Minister has committed to starting that process to make the council tax in Scotland fairer, more progressive, and most importantly, to fund our councils properly for the long term. And I'm really looking forward to getting started on that project.
That was a promise that was made in 2007, and it hasn't happened yet, and we don't seem to be an inch closer to it. So forgive the public if they don't necessarily hold their breath on that.
Well, I think the public will be grateful that Greens in government are now making commitments to actually bring that forward. It's taken Greens in government to make that. We're going to be putting forward, starting this project. I'd like to see a timeline and process put forward to this so that the public can see movement on it.
Okay,
You're right. It has been stuck for far too long in a regressive council tax that just isn't working for councils and isn't working for Scotland.
But various governments, going back 30 years, have wanted to change council tax because of all the reasons you say, and none of them have found a mechanism to be able to do it. What makes you think you guys will be able to do it in a couple of years?
Changing council tax is indeed a difficult thing to do. It absolutely needs the momentum. And you're right, government after government has failed to do it.
So why are you the people who can unlock this mystery?
We are committed to doing that. It absolutely needs doing, Martin. Our councils need to be properly funded, and we need to make sure that taxation in Scotland is fair and progressive, so that we are not burdening those who can least afford to pay. This is a big project, a core value for the Scottish Greens, and we are absolutely going to get stuck into it.
Okay, well, we'll see how that develops. So tell me about the council tax freeze then. You said there was an animated debate. Where are you on this? Is it a good policy or a bad policy?
I think we've moved that debate on yesterday. Our party members did vote overwhelmingly for us to continue to have discussions on council tax. There was a motion brought to conference by our councillors saying we do want to continue into the Bute House Agreement. We want to keep having these conversations so that we can make sure that the budget works going forward. We feel that Scottish Government works best with Greens in the room. And that is an exciting prospect for us to move.
It sounds to me, forgive me for interrupting, it sounds to me like you're slightly hamstrung by this, Lorna Slater, in that the majority of your delegates, I presume, are very anti or very concerned about council tax freezes, and yet you're a government minister, so you can't really come out and articulate that. Would that be fair? You're slightly held back in what you can say by your position in government.
It's fair to say that there has been lively debate about this at party conference, that many of our members absolutely had concerns about the council tax freeze. This is, a legitimate concern about making sure that frontline services are adequately funded. But I know my ministerial colleagues in the SNP also are concerned about frontline services being funded. So they have said to work on that budget going forward to make sure that is the case.
Good. So they have said this freeze will be fully funded. So is it your understanding that if a council comes to you and says, we were planning to raise council tax in our area by 10%, because that is the way we'll avoid making any cuts, your government will then give them that 10% increase or 15% or whatever they come to you and say? Is that what fully funded means? They'll get what they ask for, however much it is.
Oh, I suspect that there will have to be lengthy negotiations as we go forward through the budget process to understand exactly how we make sure that frontline services are fully funded. That is part of the budget process.
Well, fully funded means getting what you ask for, doesn't it?
We will have to work through this, of course, together through the budget process. It's going to be a challenging time for all of us. We know that with the cost of living crisis and inflation, with the pay settlements, which of course I'm delighted that we were able to give our public sector workers, our teachers and nurses and so on, the best pay settlements we possibly could. Of course, that every pound can only be spent once, so we need to work together to make sure those pounds are spent in the best possible way for Scotland.
If you look at the things that have happened since Humza Yousaf's taken office, deposit return scheme's gone, high highly protected marine areas. You're both personal policies for you. They've gone. The council tax has been frozen. We're told income tax may now be frozen too. We're waiting to see exactly what happens on that. This doesn't necessarily look like the progressive party that you joined forces with anymore, does it?
Oh, I think Humza Yousaf is indeed a very progressive politician, and he's put together the most progressive cabinet we've seen in the history of Scottish politics. And I think that we are making enormous headway. Things like committing to huge investment in solar power with that target, looking at how we heat and insulate buildings in Scotland. I mean, we've got very concrete things that we've delivered. The Scottish child payment, I think I saw in the Financial Times, said that that was a groundbreaking payment. 90,000 children lifted out of poverty. Free bus travel for under 22s, record investment in recycling and nature restoration, which are, of course, core green things. We've done so much, and we actually have still more to come.
It's a bit of a stretch to claim credit for the child payment, isn't it?
We're in government together. That's what collective responsibility is, and the Scottish Greens do a lot of work to make sure that we're part of every budget negotiation. Every bit of spending is scrutinised by the whole team here.
Okay, if you're in government together, and there's been a lot of talk about.
Absolutely agree on.
There's a lot of talk about progressive taxation. This idea that was at the centre of what the government was talking about until very recently, that those with more should pay a bit more to help those with a bit less. Very simple theory, although that seems to be under scrutiny now. In fact, it may not happen. There may be an income tax freeze. You're all in government together. Would you support that?
I mean, the Scottish Greens have been very clear. We support progressive taxation. It's one of our policies. All of these things, of course, are subject to negotiation and going forward. But the progressive taxation we have in Scotland's income tax now is due to the work of the Scottish Greens. The banding that means that most people in Scotland pay less tax, those who can afford to pay more pay a little bit more. That is absolutely the work of the Scottish Greens, and we will continue to do that work.
So what happens if it doesn't go any further? What happens if there is a freeze on income tax, that there's no new tax band created, there's no new tax threshold raised for those with more, for the richest? What would you do about that?
Well, I know that the First Minister said he didn't recognise that when that was put before him, so that is absolutely a matter of discussion as we go into the budget now. Right,
let me ask you a very straight question on that then. Could you and would you vote through a budget that had a council tax freeze and an income tax freeze in it?
Developing the budget is something that we do together. This is a cooperative effort, and when we get to the end of the budget process, the Greens will have been part of that every step of the way, and of course, because it's a budget we will be co-developing, we will of course sign off a budget that we've developed together.
So with tax freezes, council tax and income tax, you're just going to get your approval and your signature, yeah? If that's what it comes to.
There has absolutely been no discussion or public commitment around the change to income tax bands, potential changes to income tax bands. So that is still a live debate about how we want to manage that in Scotland, and that will be part of our budget negotiations. OK. You used to get quite a lot out of the budget when you weren't in government by saying we're not going to vote this through unless you give us this, this and this. It was actually quite a lucrative position for you to hold. Do you not think it might be better if you were out of the Bute House Agreement now and went back to that, holding the feet to the fire kind of behaviour? Absolutely not. We do every bit as much holding the feet to the fire, but now we do it inside the room instead of shouting from outside the room.
We just can't see it.
And that allows us to be really, really effective in terms of making sure that green priorities are part of every single discussion we have in government. OK.
Let me ask you about Ash Regan. She defected from the SNP to the Alpa party yesterday. You're not a member of either of those parties, but what she did say was she doesn't think independence is a real priority for the SNP anymore. Is she right?
No, she's not right. Independence is, of course, foundational to everything that we do in government, that we do in the Scottish Greens. I mean, I can't speak for any other political party, of course, but so often in my job every day, when we're trying to put in place, support for industry or even support for households, the answer is we can't do that. It's not devolved. We haven't the powers. We can't.
Okay.
And all of that is because of the dissatisfactory settlement that we're in, where most of the levers that we need for economic and green transition actually sit in Westminster with Rishi Sunak, who has just climbed down
in that case, sorry, I'm butting
commitments.
in again, but I have to, in 1 minute, I have to ask you this question as a lead on from that. Could you go into government with another party? If Labour needed your support to get an Sarwar elected as First Minister, could you do that, or is independence the red line? In 20 seconds, if you can.
The Greens are open to conversation wherever we have points in common. I think the challenge for Labour is what do they have in common with us, because it's hard to know what they stand for at the moment.
So independence isn't necessarily a red line?
Absolutely not.
OK, interesting. Straight answer, straight question. Thank you very much indeed for that and for the rest of your time this morning, Lorna Slater. Lorna Slater, of course, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens.